Look it like breeze.
Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Here on AIM, we invite industry professionals and subject matter experts on to discuss current trends and technology topics. Today, we will be talking about container and application automation with the team from Anexinet. Rejoining us are George Carter, Director of Automation Delivery, and Greg Tinker, SVP and CTO. George, Greg, how you guys doing this morning?
Doing just fine, Chris. Thank you for having us.
Also Dave is here. I always forget about him.
Poor Dave.
Poor Dave.
I know. I'm so undervalued.
So last time we talked specifically around automation of storage. Today, we're going to shift a little bit. We're going to continue to talk automation, but we're going to talk about application automation and containerization automation. So just to get us started, George, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of an introduction to this concept in general. What does it mean? What are the first things that come to your mind when you hear the phrase application automation or containerization automation?
I want to keep account of how many times we use shun in this episode.
Right. All right. So the first thing that comes to mind when we start talking about application containerization or application automation is the capability of being able to take an application and make it independent of the operating system. The old days of I need to install an executable, and in order to run the executable, I have to have the correct number of libraries, the correct number of objects in the right place, with the right flavor of operating system was very constrained, was not practical, and it would not scale. So when we think about application containerization, we're talking about taking that application and giving everything that it needs to run and function in a self-contained bubble or self-contained ecosystem that is completely independent of the operating system. Automatically, you gain so many benefits from doing that. Now you can take that application, you can run it in a cloud type environment. You can run it independent of the operating system. And you also now can control your revisions a lot more finely versus now I need to do an upgrade of the application. Let's tear the whole stack down and start from scratch. So you gain more efficiency.
Yeah. And when you do that, you also gain, like you were saying, you gain independence in terms of, just making the concept a little bit more clear. An example that I heard that makes a lot of sense when you want to explain why containerization helps is if you are, for example, a web programmer and you're testing your application and you need to test it against half a dozen different versions of a browser or half a dozen different versions of Java. You can have a container that is specifically curated with just IE7 and Java, 1.8.152. And then you have another container running simultaneously right next to it, running IE8 and Java 2.0. And they can be in the same universe without interacting or disrupting each other.
Yep, absolutely. And that gives you so much more control over your testing, over your upgrade process, if that's what the objective is. Oftentimes when you think about deploying applications, especially from a developer's perspective, that control feature really reigns high, right? This worked well in the lab. This worked great in the DevOps environment. But now when we're deploying it, it's not working at all. There's a problem here, a problem there. Well, by containerizing the app, you are eliminating the app from being that problem. It's the ecosystem, it's the environment that you now need to address. And this, as you mentioned there, Chris, you can have different flavors of that in different environments so that you can become more fine-tuned with your deployment process.
Yeah, spot on. I'll add that customers today, and we've been talking a lot about apps that are already in a container. It's also very important to note that customers can run these cloud native apps, or more importantly, non-cloud native applications, and they can port those into a container ecosystem without a costly refactoring. That's a major problem, right? We want to be able to put this in the new ecosystem, containerization, without having to report everything and have this costly refactoring. We don't have to do that anymore. That's cool. The other thing is, managing, and we like using Kubernetes, of course, but managing multiple Kubernetes clusters in a unified control plane is another big problem. Goes back to what, Chris, you just mentioned, is managing these different bubbles, if you will, in a single dashboard can easily be achieved today, especially in these more modern Kubernetes clusters and stuff. And again, on all that being said, being equal, you need a high-performance distributed file system with a persistent data state. That's another key attribute of having a Kubernetes ecosystem where you have these bubbles that sit on a platform, and this platform can run on any myriad of different technologies. And that is a huge leg up in the world of application development. And more importantly, taking that legacy app and putting it into a container ecosystem.
When you talk about a specific application that would benefit from this, especially from the perspective of a customer that maybe doesn't have any experience in this area, what are some of the good ideas that you think are a place to start so that somebody doesn't get overwhelmed by, and we'll get into some of the more advanced features later on, but in order to start somewhere, you have to start simple. What are some of the ideas that are common or popular or make a lot of sense for a customer or an enterprise that's just getting started?
I'm going to come at this a little different. I'll start with telling a story of art of the possible and letting everybody kind of understand where the industry is. And then the nice step is how to step off into that lake where you can grow your more modern ecosystem. So let's take a step back and say, hey, what's possible? Autonomous driving vehicles, everybody's heard about it, everybody kind of knows about it. I think it's kind of a mystery as to how it all works for most people in the IT ecosystem, but that is a great paradigm, if you will, an ecosystem where containerization is leveraged daily. And it's leveraging high performance compute, that is leveraging things of frameworks like PyTorch and TensorFlow to do AI, mathematical computation, to do studies, like maybe you're testing you have a test bed of 300 or 400 cars that are driving around and they're pulling in data. Maybe it's a Kroger shopping bag that gets blown in front of the car, and they're trying to let the computer understand that's a plastic shopping bag and not a baby. Things of that nature. The computers are having to be taught on how to do this and detect this, and they build what's called an inference engine. All of this runs in containers. In containers, Kubernetes being managed on high-performance compute clusters and going into that big data file system that I was talking about a few minutes ago. But understanding how that works and being able to do those differential outcomes so that you can have your data scientist running different tests. Again, these are containers. So we can actually spin up copies of these containers really quick. So different data scientists can run different test beds so they can determine what the correct inference engine is. And from that inference engine, we can then push to all of those autonomous cars and those AI components that are in those cars. They can get an update on Saturday night with their latest inference engines so that now when they detect that plastic Kroger bag that's blowing in front of the car on the road in their local hometown, the car can differentiate that being a plastic bag and not a human baby or a dog or a bird, or name your favorite. But that's just an example of where it's used in the auto industry. But on that same token, we can take that same thing, scale it way down, and do it on a myriad of manufacturing, financial, and other ecosystems.
It's pretty powerful. So, I mean, from a data science perspective, right? Being able to alter your code or your logic to look for different inferences or conclusions that you may need to draw based on a relatively large data set or sample set size, and letting multiple small groups of people work on those data sets and run independent tasks as opposed to having to wait in line serially to do one task after the other. That alone is pretty powerful, especially in that particular use case.
Spot on, Dave. And more importantly, I think George on the bridge, who runs automation and does this at scale daily with his team across North America. George, what would you add to the scenario that I mentioned? I know I gave a scenario of automotive industry, but I know you and your team do this same thing on financials, on manufacturing, and at much smaller scales, but most importantly, being able to stand up test beds and for their data scientists, or maybe it's just their IT guys, to be able to look at security, to be able to look at these particular components, to build an inference engine to better, to maybe it's just to more secure their firewalls. But what would you have to add to that, George?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really like to help customers appreciate, especially if they're new to the world of containers, how they operate, how to utilize them, how to get the most benefit out of them, is just a very small scale example using something like Nginx, using something like Apache Tomcat, right? To where they can now deploy their individual containers in a number of pods. If they're using Kubernetes or maybe they're using Docker Swarm, doesn't really matter. But they're going to deploy all these containers out there. And then once they're deployed, helping them to see exactly how to interface with those containers, how to basically isolate their network traffic or to segment that network traffic. But then also now we start talking about getting them up to the next level, because every time you deploy a number of pods and or containers, you get the capability of setting up things like logging, maybe you're using like Logstash, or you can set up certain policies, all right, whether that be a liveness policy or a readiness policy. And then based off of those policies and the violation of them, now you can make the code do something truly amazing, all right? So let's say that my particular Apache Tomcat server has a readiness policy that says that I must be below a certain CPU threshold, below a certain memory threshold, and now I'm violating that. Well, rather than having someone interface with the, with the cluster, with the orchestration engine, let's define some robotic process automation modules to now where we can automatically mitigate that particular pod, that particular container, and scale it up upon demand. Now, when customers see that and they see, wow, I'm able to actually provide a microservice, and depending on the load on that microservice and my resource availability, I can scale that up without having to interface with the cluster. That's powerful. That's uptime. That's ROI.
That's amazing stuff. And, and then you start talking about like database technology, right? Like distributed caching, Redis in-memory caches, Redis caches, and things of that nature. And now you can have this containerized application architecture that really spans dispersed geographic location and then leverage things like in-memory caching. So you get really fast writes and commits, right? If you're a user, think about it this way. I go to my favorite website or whatever, and I need to upload some data, or I need to make some kind of an entry or place an order or whatever. And if I'm in California, I can get to an instance of that application that's in California. So I'm getting really fast, web response times, and I get a really good user experience. But it might be writing to a centralized database that's back on the East Coast, but I don't care. And then there's a whole nother instance of that application running in the East Coast or in the UK or in Australia, and they can all operate seamlessly together. And you have whole instances of these applications running these various services that can all write to a common data source. So you have that non-repudiation or that known good data. You don't have to worry about things being overwritten or not being distributed globally. I think when you bring all that together, there's a lot of power there that people have been looking to solve. That geographic dispersity of applications with outside of content delivery networks has always been kind of a challenge, I think.
Yep, spot on, Dave. And what you're talking about there, as you start to morph into that direction, now you start getting into your HA management, right? HA compliancy to ensure that, okay, if a particular node on this coast perhaps goes down, I don't want to stand up one on the other side that could perhaps impact my performance, right? I want to be able to stand up one in this particular geography, and you can do all that through containerization, through automation.
And I think the use cases are basically endless, right? It's really, you're not embracing a technology so much as you are embracing an architecture, don't you think, George?
Absolutely, you are. And we can even carry this even just a little further, right? So we've talked about like some of the benefits of just core containerization from a high end, all right, all the way down to a low end, something like an Nginx, a load balancer. But when you think about the developers who are producing this code, who are making these changes to your orchestration engine, right? As I mentioned, whether that's Kubernetes, whether that's Docker Swarm, doesn't matter. But when you think about their contribution to this, and we actually refer to that as our release management chain, that part in of itself can also be automated. I just want to highlight that because this is a piece that some of our customers just don't realize the value of automating this segment too as well. When we think about the average developer, and let's say they're maintaining your robotic process automation, or they're maintaining your Nginx, your Apaches, whatever that container is actually doing, there's a number of steps that these developers have to go through, right? They have to basically edit the file, they have to push the repo, they have to then make sure they push the image, then load that particular image into your orchestration engine, all right, so that you can activate that particular container. Now, I speak from experience in saying that that's just a few of those steps, and I can guarantee you I have forgotten one or two of them throughout the course of a project. But it's not just me, it's really all developers, all right? you can forget a step and you can't figure out exactly why is this image not showing up, or where is that particular revision, or did someone actually modify that YAML file like they were supposed to and update the README like they're supposed to. Well, you can actually automate that entire process to where when the developer is finished with that particular revision, the entire process is automated all the way from that revision all the way out to, if it's Kubernetes, right, so your K8s container, you can automate the whole flow so that you don't have that human error. And that in itself makes an organization way more efficient.
Right. And I think equally important is if you write your orchestrations and your automations thoroughly, automating the deployment is one thing, but if you run into an error or a problem, you can also automate a rollback.
That is it. That's it exactly, Chris. Yeah, you certainly can. And that's true whether or not the customer is using some sort of manifest, or maybe they're using like Helm charts. There's a number of them out there. But regardless of what they have implemented inside of their release management structures, yeah, you can also automate the rollback procedure. All right, this particular release is not giving me what I want. It's got problems. All right, now I want to roll back automatically based off of perhaps even events. So I'm going to deploy, like, for example, my new release of Apache. We'll just keep this simple. My new release of Apache container. And after I release this, everyone's having problems with it. It's got performance problems. It's not doing what I want it to do. Well, rather than someone having to pick up the phone or log a ticket and tell me that my latest release is not up to par, well, since I'm monitoring logging, since I'm monitoring that container, I want to automatically be able to roll back to the previous container, the previous image, and get ahead of that call storm. All that's possible.
Wow. You know what I just thought of? I don't know if this would be operationally effective, but it just occurred to, I mean, as a security guy, it just occurred to me, you could almost set up a fail-safe scenario where if a developer or developers, promoted code or something made its way into production, and then through the course of your vulnerability management or scanning, a high or critical CVEs, was registered or has become exposed, you could actually automate getting that critical alert and then having a maintenance page pop up and say, whoop, sorry, we're temporarily down for maintenance, and then fail back to a known secure version of the app automatically. Again, operational challenges there, I understand, but the in theory, that fail-safe kind of scenario for public-facing web applications or even B2B I think is pretty powerful. I'd almost love to see us put a framework like that together. What do you guys think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're doing is you're practically guaranteeing uptimes, right? If the current release doesn't work, we simply roll back to the previous while you work on that latest release there. Certainly something that we've seen done before in the past. Now, I think it's really going to depend on the industry too, as you mentioned, Dave. If it's more of a public-facing microservice that they're running, absolutely the value is there. But if they're just a DevOps shop to where having that microservice alive all the time isn't that critical, then probably not so much so. But yeah, if it's customer-facing, if it's public-facing, absolutely, it's a game changer.
The thing that popped into my head was like Stitch Fix, right? I watched the Stitch Fix CTO give a really interesting, I don't know if it was like a TED Talk or it might have been a TED Talk. Either way, he gave a lecture on kind of microservices and service-oriented architectures, containerization, and it was really interesting to hear the way that they distributed their application. And I think at one point they actually kind of gave a visual depiction of what the Netflix microservices architecture looks like and how it all kind of piles on top of each other, what talks to what and everything else. As a consumer of the company, right? Like if I was on their mobile app and, they had a service that had, some sort of cross-site scripting capability that was exposed or whatever, I would be more than happy to have that page literally kick me off and give me a maintenance page and wait for a refresh to happen and come back and try again if it means that they're going to protect my credit card information and my personal information. In the world that we live in today, I don't know how many chief operations officers are going to think that this is the worst idea in the world in terms of user experience, but I would rather fail safe and protect information in this day and age than have a good user experience and be subject to a breach and have to worry about identity theft for the next 12 to 18 months.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Or not able to get gas.
You might not be able to get gas. Yeah.
That's so and I agree with you, spot on, Dave. The benefits, I think, if you were to sum them up into three simple benefits, it's going to be able to transform the non-cloud native apps without re-architecting. That's a huge one. The other benefit, in my opinion, would be building an application once and deploying it anywhere. That's huge. So for those that are building net new. And lastly, it's having that enterprise class security in performance and reliability, which goes right to what you're talking about, Dave.
Yeah. I mean, from a security perspective, if I get out of the specifics, right, and just talk about in general, from a security perspective, the idea of the concept and architecture of microservices and containers is very powerful, because regardless of people's opinion, code is data, right? It is data. It sits on a disk somewhere, and eventually it's subject to runtime and execution, but it is data. And supply chain attacks are on the rise, obviously. Look at SolarWinds, right? So from a security perspective, being able to take this massive piece of monolithic code and break it into modular blocks with a specific function and a purpose just allows such higher levels of granular control, and say, I understand what this particular piece of code is supposed to do and how the data is processed and then where it flows. And then moving up a level, understanding, so your pods and your containers, the different components they're in, how they're communicating between each other, and then how they're laid out on physical architecture, and then what networking is supposed to be required for those to be able to communicate effectively. It just brings the whole concept of data flow control down to where I think it needs to be for us as security and IT professionals, whether you're an ops or a developer, so that you can put in the right level of control and safety and safeguards that need to be there. And you're not trying to interpret this massive piece of monolithic code. Everything is function by function by function by function. I think it just makes the job a lot more simple, right? Because you can analyze things on an individual basis, as opposed to, it's like, instead of reading War and Peace, right? You read the War and Peace for Dummies, and you get to do an editorial review on that. It goes a lot faster, and you can be a lot more nimble. That's what I like about it.
There we go, the Cliff Note version. I like it. Yeah, but you're totally right, Dave. When you think about, just standard legacy apps, there was always that problem, right? It was always that problem where does this app reside? Where does the data get stored, and who's touching it? I mean, we have no idea sometimes, right? Because these things have been deployed. They've been utilized by everyone. But whenever you start to containerize, now you do get that level of control. You get that level of granularity. I'm able to say that this particular app, which is OS independent, like we said, it resides in this particular pod. All right. And now I can control that pod either sees storage that's shared, or it only sees storage for itself. That's it. It's isolated. It's segmented. And then I can do the exact same thing from the networking layer. I can say, well, this particular pod can only talk to things within this pod, all the containers within this pod, or I want this pod to be able to talk to other pods based off of my regulatory needs, just based off any kind of rules that I have. It gives you that layer of granularity that I love. So I completely agree with that.
I think one of the things that's important to highlight, and I don't want to bury it because Greg brought up a great point in terms of the container benefits. All of the features of containers apply whether you're simply porting an application that used to run on-prem into a container, into the cloud, or building an application from scratch, completely cloud native, whether it's your microservices architecture, your Netflixes of the world are one thing, but just bringing a simple monolithic application out of an aging data center and into a cloud environment is another. All of the processes, all of the securities that we're talking about, and all of the application automations apply equally in both use cases, which really helps level the playing field and helps enterprises modernize on a container platform and let the applications teams build at the pace that they need to build.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's like a different level of maturity, right? You can move into a container architecture without necessarily moving into a microservices architecture, and still reap some of the benefits. Is that right? Or did I get that wrong?
No, I mean, that is completely right. I mean, so you're thinking about, I just want to deploy a container versus I want to manage an orchestration engine that governs containers. All right. So when we're talking about, I just want a containerized application that I'm going to push into a cloud native service. All right. That's simple. That's easy. You get the same benefits that Chris just mentioned, the same benefits that Greg mentioned, right? Just by having that app containerized. But when you start talking about things like Kubernetes and Docker Swarm, now you're talking about basically automating, because that's what they do. They orchestrate the container itself, that environment. They do add a lot of benefits to you. However, through automation, you now can control the orchestration engine versus the individual container. All right, so just because you're using the orchestration engine doesn't eliminate the need for automation. In fact, it actually gives you a whole new layer, a whole new level of automation. Now you get a chance to control things like your quotas, your probes. You get to control the pods, how they interact with each other. You get to control your policies per pod, per container, whatever the case may be, versus just focusing in on the individual container. So the benefits get even better.
I got a big question that I think everybody is going to want to hear, right? So what does the journey look like, right? If I want to move, and let's talk about the two different sides of it. Let's talk about, I want to get some of these container benefits that we've talked about. I want to be able to be more cloud native without having to absorb so much infrastructure as a service cost. And then, hey, I really want to dissect this monolith and move it toward microservices, because I want to accelerate my level of application maturity and resiliency and burstability and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk to us a little bit about the journey, what people need to go through and consider, I guess, from a CTO, and then also maybe from like a management developer perspective, and then how can we help as an Anexinet?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Typically where we start these discussions is at the application, because that's what it's about, right? Because we're talking about containerizing applications. So it starts with a nice detailed review of the applications that are in scope. We then take it from there, all right, once we determine that those applications are indeed container friendly, we then take it from there, and then we need to start looking at any kind of compliance and regulatory constraints that exist for each one of those applications. All right, so we're adding just a little bit, a little bit more of a layer of complexity. All right, once we understand that, how the applications need to operate inside the ecosystem, the rules that govern those particular applications, now we can kind of work with the customer to design a migration strategy, if you will. Now, what we tend to do is, if it's just a few applications, then as far as trying to incorporate a big fancy orchestration engine to govern just a handful of containerized applications is not very profitable for a customer. That's not the greatest ROI. It's more work, all right, than it's worth. So if it's just a few applications, then we tend to steer away from some sort of orchestration engine. But if they have a large ecosystem, they have a lot of compliance and regulatory needs. They have data silos that they're trying to also manage, right? Where they're trying to segment their data. All right, now we do need to start talking about an orchestration engine. And if they are new to containers themselves, then something like a Docker Swarm, because it is very simple. I'll just say it has a smaller learning curve versus Kubernetes. But if they are somewhat familiar with containers, if their DevOps teams are actually very familiar with this technology, then we can kind of recommend a Kubernetes type journey. And then once we get all that mapped out, we then start talking to them about their release management structures, all right? How are they going to basically introduce updates to their containers? Are they going to use a Jenkins Helm chart type of manifest? What is their plan? And we can help them along that journey. Once we have everything mapped out end to end, all right, now we can talk about where exactly they want all of this to reside. Is this going to be on-prem, off-prem? Are they going to be using perhaps some sort of Tanzu type of infrastructure? Are they going to be using an Esmeralda data fabric? So we can start talking to them about that. But it really starts with the application and really helping our customer appreciate what's possible, because this is what we do day in, day out, help them to appreciate what's possible, what's the best practices, and how those best practices apply to their business segment.
That was awesome. So what you just said was that not only can we help you with the technology part, the hands-on keyboard, to start taking some action, right? But we'll actually help you with the advisory services and counsel that you need to think about the considerations of how this is going to change your development activities and transform your development operations. That's what you really said, which goes well beyond, just containers and orchestration and automation. You're talking about really, these development operations practices go to the core of how you run your business operation, depending on what you do and how you do business, right?
That is it. And I'll give you an example there, Dave, right? So we basically were called on to aid a customer in this journey, all right? They had a large development team, 60 plus developers, fairly new developers too, right, for this particular organization or this entity. And they wanted to basically embrace a containerized infrastructure for their microservices, all right? So the elements that were critical to their business. So how do you get 60 developers who are fairly new to this type of environment to agree to a particular approach? Well, you have to bring in a third party. That's how you do it.
I was going to say, I can't even get my kids to agree, and there's only two of them.
That's it, exactly. All right, so by bringing us in as that subject matter expert, we're able to basically listen to their ideas. Hey, this is what I think we should do. No, this is what I think we should do. So taking all that input and then align it with industry best practice as to how you would lay this out. And then once we did all that, we were able to present to them, okay, based off of your microservices, what you're trying to accomplish, all of your compliancy and regulatory demands that are on your business, all right, this is the correct model. And then not only did we basically present to them this model, we actually trained them on it. Actually took them through the process to set up the release management structures, took them through the process of actually containerizing and then publishing their first application. All right, that's what we did for this client. Now, the end result is the platform that they had selected that they thought they wanted to be on, they actually found out that they don't need it. They didn't even want that platform. But we were able to help them through that journey end to end. And yeah, now they're basically moving on to what's next.
Ladies and gentlemen, George Carter, developer, therapist, and psychologist, works at Anexinet. Set up a call today.
Every time I listen to George, I get more impressed. Love it. So yeah, I can't add anything to what George said. It's just phenomenal.
All right. So we talked a little bit about, how they get there. Let's talk a little bit about market exposure. Should people be considering this for all the good things that we talked about? Are there definitely still customer personas or application use cases that are out there where this just really doesn't make sense? When can I, as a CTO, just say, this just isn't for me? Or is there a time that I should do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dave. And I think the answer is always. And what I mean by that is, as a CTO, CIO, right, you need to constantly be evaluating your application stack. All right. Containers is what's going forward. And the reason why are all the benefits that we've mentioned thus far. All right. They just far outweigh old legacy applications. That said, the ones who would tend to shy away or refrain from embracing containerization typically is because they have legacy applications that will no longer port, that you can no longer containerize. And if that is indeed the case, then oftentimes they need to give attention to how do we get off of this legacy application? Because
what's a circumstance where that would happen, George? What is something that, do you have an example of something that just won't port, or why would something not be portable?
Yeah, I have a good example of that. So we were working with a client that had a service desk, and this was a custom-made service desk, right? And it was basically running an Apache engine, Tomcat, and they had a bunch of customized objects, things that were applicable probably in the late 90s, maybe, hopefully, right? And sadly, those objects, those libraries were just no longer available. You can't containerize that. They don't make them anymore. All right. So in those kind of use cases, it is often best to help the customer embrace that we need to come off of this legacy app. We need to get you on something that is more user-friendly, that is going to be more nimble for your business. Oftentimes, a client will have those legacy apps and they're kind of stuck to them because they have inherited them. All right. When they took over whatever role they're in, that application was already there. It's been running the business. It's quiet. We don't want to play with it. We don't want to upgrade it because we can't. Well, that is a very dangerous situation to be in. And a lot of organizations have had significant downtime because they didn't want to face the truth that that application was really a single point of failure for them. But by embracing that, giving attention to it, and now saying we're either going to containerize this if we can, or we're going to deploy something new that can be containerized to where we can offload that workload, that is the way forward for most organizations.
Dave, I'll actually add to that. We typically find ourselves in that situation with a large enterprise company that has had a lot of M&A activity. So they usually have, it's not that they grew this themselves, they typically have acquired it through an acquisition, and the person, whichever, plural, singular, that was responsible for that particular legacy app, and we'll go and call it legacy. That situation built a business. That business now has exited stage left, or the key contributors, I guess, have left stage left. And that's what's left, is the team is trying to keep the business running, and at the same time trying to figure out how to fix that situation. We have large pharmaceuticals that meet this criteria. We have large financial corporations that have run into this situation. So it's very common in large-scale ecosystems where M&A activity has occurred. And there are situations where customers have built it over time. And I can think of one distribution company that has got a particular application that built the business over the last 20 years, and they're still running on that app. The problem is the app is 20 years old, and the system in which it actually runs can no longer be acquired. The processors, the CPU, and I'm referring to Spark for those that are curious, that systems are no longer made, and that's becoming a much bigger problem in trying to get the hardware. So this is a very common situation, and it's something that George and our team in the automation and containerization department works with a lot of enterprises on helping them embrace that new ecosystem. And sometimes we can port, sometimes we just need to pull a product off the shelf and start from scratch on migrating the application that they have.
Yep, that's it, Greg. Yeah, I think your term that you always use is a Frankenmonster, right?
Yes, yeah. The old Frankenmonster. Those are, those are good college projects. We do a lot of work in the SLED space. For those that don't know what that means, it's state, local education, universities, private sector in the university space with high performance compute. And what we find in that space is usually a lot of open source code, which is great because it's free. And they actually have their PhD candidates go in and build this awesome product. Then the guys or girls all graduate, move on, get paying jobs, and the university is left with what we call a Frankenmonster. And nobody can support it. Nobody knows how it works. And they usually call us up to try to figure out how to get out of the ditch. Those are always a lot of fun.
You mean people get paid coming out of college?
I know. What a unique concept.
I didn't know we were doing that anymore.
I went to the wrong college.
You and me both, brother.
But yeah, at the Greg's point, when you have a customer that's in that situation, it can be very challenging. It can be almost a daunting obstacle for them to try to overcome, especially if they've built a BU or they've built their entire business on that particular application. And
it's not all technical either. It's sometimes it's emotional. It's I go back to what David said earlier. George and his team, he spends as much time technically as he does philosophy-wise of trying to encourage the customer to embrace new technology, because it's hard, isn't it? Is it not, George?
It is. It is. I worked in disaster recovery for a number of years, and I guess that's why I'm so passionate about this, because I've seen it happen time and time and again to where a customer makes a declaration, the walls are burning down, and now they're on site and they're trying to get this application that they thought was solid to run again, and it just simply will not. And their entire business hinges on the success of this application running. So I hate to see customers in that situation, and we love to help them out of that. Oftentimes we'll take that application and we will begin to dissect it, right? Because applications typically will do a number of different activities, so we can actually containerize an individual activity of an application, and then as a whole within a pod, all right, now you have your ported application now.
That makes a lot of sense. So would Anexinet be able to help a customer modernize an application that might have some legacy components or candidacy issues for containerization? Would we be able to do code modernization or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done that before in the past. We have a team of developers, very skilled individuals that will look at the code, all right, if it is available to us. And if it's not available to us, then we can write customized modules that can mimic that functionality so that it can be containerized. We've done that for a number of customers. It does happen, like Greg mentioned, and oftentimes, the customer may not have the individuals who wrote that, or maybe the company may not even be in existence anymore who wrote that. But our developers have the skill sets in-house to be able to identify what that functionality is, replicate that functionality in modern code, and then also be able to containerize that to help that customer make that digital transformation.
All right, new tagline: Anexinet, secure modern application gurus. Or something.
Keep going.
I'm obviously not in marketing.
I just want to wind it back a tiny bit. I think some of the things that we've been talking about are a little advanced. And I think that's good because it highlights the capabilities of containerization and application automation. One of the things, George, that you said that I just wanted to highlight was when, for example, a customer is either trying to migrate or move into a container environment for the first time, the important thing is the workload. Because one of the things that I've seen is if people accidentally come to it backwards, say, I want to use Helm with Kubernetes and throw Nginx into containers, and I'm going to be a perfect organization. And then as they start building, the wheels absolutely fall off. The reason being they didn't start with the workload. They didn't start with where do they need to go? How can we get there? And then they get overwhelmed by the concepts and also by, frankly, the amount of products that are available in this space. And then a product doesn't go anywhere. The development gets mired in confusion and rewrites and starting from scratch over and over and over again. And they never get where they want to go because they honestly didn't have a clear understanding of where they wanted to go in the first place.
Well, it becomes a technology decision. Like that's what you're talking about. Everything in technology, we always look, everybody likes to work on the next new thing, right? Ops guys like to work on the next new server, the next new operating system, the next new firewall. Developers always like whatever's hot in the market, right? I don't even know what's hot in the market right now. Maybe apps and containers. Maybe that's probably the hot thing in the market. But everybody always wants to work on the hot thing in the market and it becomes a technology decision. But I think what George highlighted to us was very important. And, we're coaching customers through what needs to be thought about to be able to plan for these kinds of migrations. And it's not a daunting task. He laid it out in 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes, right? It was well under. But thinking through it from start to finish and understanding what your objectives are sets the pace for what decisions you make along the way. Then the technology kind of comes along the path as you go.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's it, Dave. I mean, when we bring our senior developers into a situation, and keep in mind, our developers, they operate day in, day out in these type of ecosystems. But bringing them and their expertise to bear on the problem, on the migration journey that the customer is trying to make, we're able to basically take that holistic view. Emotions are involved and things like that. We can look and say, okay, best practice for this type of environment, for this scenario is X. And then we can lay out the plan for the customer. And to Chris's point, customers can certainly approach this from a reversed angle, if you will, to where, yes, they have Helm charts. Yes, they have their Jenkins release management structures in place, and they get very happy, actually start to containerize everything. And I'll give you this one use case of a customer who did that very thing, got very happy with containers, kicked it all out, everything was running great, but they never gave concept or thought to namespace, actually segmenting their namespaces per pod, per use case, all right? And what that does is it pretty much puts all your eggs in one basket. All right. So now when your quotas kick in, when your readiness probe, your liveness probes kick in, they're executing off of one particular namespace, which is very dangerous. So if that namespace goes away, guess what? All the pods and the containers along with it goes away too as well. But that's just a lack of attention to that holistic design. And that's where we come in. So we can help the customer make the transformation end to end, design the best strategy going forward, train them with how to use it, help them implement it, and if they so choose, we even can offer managed services to help them govern some of the elements of their container platform.
Yeah, you're fundamentally changing their development operation, right? So we're not talking about technology so much as we are talking about operations. And you're getting people to work differently because they're going to have to interface with the technology differently. They're going to be developing under a completely different paradigm. it's a whole new thing. And so unless you're willing to embrace the architecture and lay down, like any architecture, lay down a foundation that is good and built on requirements that meet your needs, you're probably not looking at the picture broadly enough, and you're going to run into potential problems and speed bumps.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Yeah, the reason that so many customers are embracing containers and taking this approach is because of the way things were. And the way things were, it was pretty much the Wild West, right? You would have someone release something or create something and implement it into the environment. And then if it worked, great. He was a hero. If it didn't work, then of course, who did it? Because he's not going to fess up.
Well, and to be fair,
Yeah.
you could theoretically run into that same situation under a containerized architecture, because you have packages, right? So you have got packages that need to run like Nginx or Apache or whatever, pick a package. I don't even know them all. But then you have your code that runs, right? So there's two separate things. So if you move into a container architecture and you're still running in the Wild West without laying down a framework for how you're going to do security and standards and governance, you're probably going to run into the same problems that you had traditionally. This is a way to embrace a new architecture that has a lot of benefits operationally, monetarily, technically, but you move forward and use this disruption as an opportunity to smooth some of the things that may not have been so mature or done right in the first place.
Absolutely, Dave. And that's another reason why customers are asking for our expertise in this area, because yes, you're absolutely correct. You can't have containers and still run in a wild, wild west type environment. But the way we typically will design the release management structures is to prevent something like that from happening. All right, so the release management structure that we typically will recommend falls in 3 tiers, where you have your release developers, you have your reviewers, and then you have your actual deployment engineers. And all that is controlled by RBAC, all right? So that the individual who's writing the code and releasing it for review, completely separate from the individuals who's actually doing the review and approving it to go out the door, all right? So everything is very granular. You have readmes, you have who did what, right? Who's who in the zoo, as Greg would always say. And if there is a problem, now you know exactly who created the problem. And as we mentioned earlier, just through automation, you can quickly roll back to the previous release without bringing the entire BU or the business down.
You had me at RBAC. I mean, being able to do secure development operations and have role-based access control that actually makes sense instead of 200 developers that really work on different things. And they still work on their code in a modular way, even though the code isn't modular, and they all have the same level of permission, right? Which to me is the Wild West. And so being able to get down to granular teams that work on this function of the application, this function of the application, this part of the release management process, that part of the release management process, approvers, production promoters, whatever, that level of granular role-based access control is just so required in this day and age. It really is just table stakes at this point in time. If you're not doing that and putting that level of control and review into your code deployment, you're just asking for trouble, in my opinion.
I totally agree, Dave. And one of the concerns about having that kind of granularity in the release management chain is that, well, it's going to slow down the CI/CD pipeline, right? So the continuous integration, continuous development pipeline, it's going to slow us down. And we have not seen that. We've actually seen just the opposite. It's made customers more efficient in their CI/CD release structures. They're able to basically get things out the door into prod faster, because it is streamlined. It is clear as who's doing what and who controls what, versus the old Wild Wild West method, to where this particular developer, he developed it, and he'll kick it out whenever he can, and who knows, where the revisions are. This way works, and customers love it.
All right, so we've got better operations. We've got faster time to delivery. We've got more stable and resilient architecture. We've got burstable architecture, better security for the customers and also for the business operations in terms of development. Lots of value added here, and Anexinet can help our customers move in this direction and modernize their applications, port them to the cloud, make them more versatile. A lot of great and significant value.
This is where I want to say, but wait, there's more.
Right, exactly. But wait, there's one more. Yeah, this is the best infomercial ever.
I think there's one last voice that needs to be heard, and we've been spending a lot of time talking at a CIO level and a CISO level, but Let's talk very briefly to the CFOs in the room. What's the value proposition of all of this stuff? What is the return on investment for modernizing an environment with containers, with this type of automation? What have you seen that really makes the accountants happy?
This is measurable. There is TCO and ROI studies that have been done, and we do a lot of these with some very large manufacturers. One case in point is Hewlett Packard. We have others, but I won't belabor that point. But at a high level, the simplest way to look at it is time to value of application development, security, return on investment there from the fact that you don't have an outage, you don't get hacked, you don't end up in a situation where you can't supply gas to half the U.S. That'd be a problem. So it's those type of situations that is a measurable, tangible outcome to taking and putting it into a container-based approach where you can have test embodiments, brute force hack attacks against it with testing of security components. And lastly, it helps customers, in my opinion, get off of the legacy IT approach of application development into a more modern approach where they can safeguard their business for the next 10 to 20 years. George?
Yep. I think you covered most of it, Greg. I just want to add two more. All right. Number one, their developers, their workforce is happy. And more importantly, the customers are happy because they're getting that HA experience. All right. No longer is the application not available to the customer. No longer is my application not available to my workforce. Everyone has what they need on demand with the capability of being able to scale up. And to put a price tag on that, you just really can't.
Giving everybody that Amazon-like experience. In today's world, everybody wants instant results. When you and your family go shopping, if you're online, you're 99% time on Amazon. I mean, sure, there's others, Walmart, whatnot, and others, but most people are very familiar with the analogy of Amazon shopping. And if the Amazon Web Service went down, the pain would be in the news. I mean, you'd be the cover story of every Wall Street, New York, or name your favorite journal. Companies just don't want that negative publicity. Everybody wants the problem solved now, and this new modern ecosystem allows for quicker time to value to be able to say, yes, it works, no, it don't, roll back, and have that instant rollback, not, oh my God, I got to schedule it downtime midnight tonight. I want to be back in minutes, not hours, not days, not weeks.
Any final thoughts?
No, I think we summed it up very good. I'm hoping the audience heard the passion that George and his entire team brings, the wealth of knowledge, the skill, the professionalism, and quite frankly, everybody loves hearing George talk about it. So I was really impressed with the summary that George provided today in simplifying a very complex topic.
No, this is very good. I really appreciate everyone's attention. And this, as I mentioned, this is something that's very passionate for us, something that we do day in, day out. And we have a lot of customers that are in various stages, if you will, of making this kind of a transformation. You have some that are thinking about containers. They would like to get into it, but just very hesitant, or perhaps don't know exactly how their ecosystem can fit containers into that. Then you have other customers that are already, starting to embrace containers. They have some elements, but they want refinements. And then you have other customers that are advanced, and now they're looking for the complete automation. How can we refine this to go faster, to be more efficient? And my message to our listeners here today is that here at Anexinet, we can help the client with each one of those stages. We can basically bring our expertise to bear to design a solution for them so that they can containerize, to look at their existing containers perhaps where they can make refinement, or to even look at what they've already built with a view to automation and with the view of efficiency so that they can get greater ROI regardless of where they're at.
All right. I think we can leave it there. George, Greg, thanks again for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Later, gents.